This is I Have No Title and I Must podcast, where we discuss any and all aspects of pop culture that is on our mind. We are your hosts, Tyler
and Chris.
And today we have a special guest host,
Becca.
And we are officially in spooky season. And so we figured the best way to kick this off, we're going to talk about our favorite horror movies. Becky, as the guest host, do you want to kick us off with your number 3?
Okay. I wasn't expecting that, but sure. I'll go ahead. And my number 3 choice is actually The Omen from 1976.
So the original.
Yes, the original Omen. The 70s were a pivotal time, I think, for the genre. And there's a lot of strong content from the 70s. And as I've gone back and revisited them, The Omen is the one that has kind of won me over time. I prefer it like over The Exorcist and other things like that. It's such a familiar theme, but it's done in this foreboding, like the way the tension builds, the sense of dread. And the casting is amazing. You got Gregory Peck. You've got the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton, plays the priest. And it ties in all these themes of superstition, religious hysteria, power, politics, and has some very memorable death scenes. Some of the
Patrick Troughton's is
Patrick Troughton's, and the photographer guy, I think, the journalist. I can't remember who played him, but it's that glass window sliding off the thing and decapitating him scene.
I thought that was Patrick Troughton.
No, Patrick Troughton was the lightning.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I had those two mixed up.
And just the way that the story builds and
and the hanging.
Know what's...
Is that the one where the woman jumps off?
Yeah.
Oh,
that
yes.
famous scene. It's all for you.
Yeah, it's all for you. And that's your first indication where the story's going to go. These bizarre things just keep happening around this kid and at his birthday party, this birthday celebration. And then the nanny just comes out with the rope tied around her neck at the top of the house or whatever. And is like, look at me, Damien. Look at me, Damien. It's all for you, Damien. And it just has this foreboding sense. It was a good storyline to build on. The introduction of the character and the way it all unfolds. In the end, spoiler alert, Damien survives. They know what he is. They figured out what he is, and they're trying to stop what he's going to become. But nay. He gets to go on because he is this chosen one. He is this satanic, being who has this destiny, and it cannot be thwarted.
I like to think that the Dead Zone is a fan fiction sequel to that.
Ooh, that's an interesting concept.
Christopher Walken shakes hands with him as an adult and knows what he is and has to kill him.
I have to admit, I've seen that one, but it has been a while, and I remember almost nothing from it.
Yeah, it's been a long time for me, too. I think I might have mixed up memories from the remake.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at.
They changed the biggest thing I remember is they changed the dogs either from Dobermans to Rottweilers or Rottweilers to Dobermans. It was originally Dobermans, right?
I think so.
Because Rottweilers seem like a more modern pick, whereas Dobermans are like classic evil-looking deity dogs.
It's like Resident Evil took the Doberman, so they had to switch.
Yeah, and Dobermans were typically portrayed as hounds of hell for a long time. And also an interesting little note about the difference between the original and the remake is that the remake actually has Mia Farrow in it. And of course, that is a little nod to her being Rosemary in Rosemary's Baby, which is also about a satanic child. So nice little bookend there within the genre.
You're looking at me.
It's like, you just want to go in a circle.
All right, I guess. I mean, either way it would be a circle. It's a triangle.
Third pick.
All right. Okay. So there was two competing things in my head. I'll mention one, but I'm going with another. This isn't a movie, more a made-for-TV thing from Masters of Horror. My third pick would have been Shaun of the Dead, which I still really love. It's one of the very few zombie movies that I like. But the thing that I'm going with, I think, personifies. Since we're doing this, it's for horror movies, but it's for the season, and I think the person who personifies this season the most is Edgar Allan Poe. And there hasn't been a lot of successful adaptations of his work for good reason. I love John Cusack, but The Raven sucked. All right?
Agreed.
Like, he feeds heart to his pet raccoon. What is this? Anyway, so there was a show on, I want to say HBO. It might have been Showtime or Stars or some other movie channel called Masters of Horror. And I think it was in their second season. They had an adaptation of The Black Cat. They did something interesting with it, where they got Jeffrey Combs, one of the best character actors ever, to play Edgar Allan Poe to perfection. No one has outdone him. Not Not even
Also agree.
Not even the guy from Harry Potter who was in The Pale Blue Eye. He did a great job, but it's not as much fun. This one's fun. It's super dark. It's got some intense gore, and it's an adaptation of The Black Cat, but weaving it through Edgar Allan Poe's real life. So it's this weird amalgam of him going through the struggles that he really had. So it serves as like a little mini biopic of like a little snapshot of his life too, because it's more accurate than the actual movie about him, where they tried to just turn him into Sherlock Holmes. That was The Raven. Anyway, if you haven't seen The Raven, don't watch it. Look for this episode of Masters of Horror called The Black Cat. It's pitch perfect.
Are we just going to gloss over Vincent Price when talking about Edgar Allan Poe adaptations?
So, no, I don't want to do that because I love those, but they're a little hokey. So I watched those in school. Okay, I think our audience is looking for a little bit more of a firm affair for their spooky season. But if you got kids, for sure, get anything Vincent Price. I mean, The Fly almost made it onto my list because I love Vincent Price so much. I even thought about, like, could I shoehorn Edward Scissorhands in here somehow?
Yeah.
But I decided against it. I wanted to take this seriously. Anything that's got Vincent Price in it is well worth mentioning and calling me out on. But those are more wink and a nod and a little bit more fun, and take the bite out and put more fun into the Halloween season, which I think is actually lacking. I think it needs to be more fun so that people don't take it so seriously, because it's where we get satanic panic from.
Well, that's how Vincent Price always was with his stuff. He was always riding that line between comedy and horror.
Which I think we need more of, honestly. And I think there's this little bit of glee in Jeffrey Combs. There's glee and sadness in Jeffrey Combs' portrayal of Poe. And as dark as you think this might get, it's got an oddly... It's a happy ending, but it's not, because his real life is tragic. But watch it. I've got a copy. It was really hard to find, but I do have a copy if we want to watch this, because like it had a scene in it that even though Allison used to watch, like she used to put Saw on in the background and fall asleep to it, now she's become sensitized. Oddly enough, she resensitized herself. We watched this and it has a scene in it with an axe that was so intense that she said she never wanted to watch this again. So I was like, but we saw the behind the scenes with the woman walking around with the things sticking out of her and she's just laughing or whatever and then blood squirting everywhere. So I was like, that takes the fear out of it, right? Nope. Apparently not.
Well, yeah, I saw how they did the practical effects for the Evil Dead remake as well, but I still have not gone back and rewatched that movie.
God.
It's very disturbing.
So it's not the one where they're shooting, the guy's got a nail gun shooting up into his face? Or,
Yes.
Ugh.
Yes.
Damn.
And the woman like is sawing her arm off with the...
I've blocked a lot of that out.
The like electric carving knife in the kitchen. Yeah, that one is a tough watch, even for seasoned, gore and horror aficionados.
I was going to say, I just watched that the other day.
Well, I blame Stephen King. I blame Stephen King for me wanting to see that movie so bad, because Stephen King gave this very over-the-top endorsement of the film and was saying it was the most electrifying horror film he had seen in ages. And I was like, okay, if Steven says that, I'm going to go see it. And I do remember we went to an early showing. Chris and I went to an early showing.
Yep, didn't help.
Very early in the morning, like first thing we watched that morning. And right in the first scene, within the first scene, when the first girl has been possessed or whatever, and her father is like burning her alive or something. And I remember, looking over at Chris, and Chris looked at me and was like, "You wanted to watch this." And I was like, yeah, probably a mistake.
I had actually put off watching that for a while just because I was such a fan of the originals. I'm like, no, don't touch it while you're doing it. But I have to admit, it was pretty good. A lot better than it should have been.
So, yeah. I'm still waiting for a major motion picture release of something Edgar Allan Poe related.
That would do it justice.
That would be good.
Yeah, I mean, it should happen. He has so much resource material. There's a wide variety to be able to choose from, but to go back to your pick, I do remember watching that as well. And there are things from that do stand out in my mind. So it is, even though it's a short film and everything, it is very memorable. And a lot of that is due to Jeffrey Combs' performance.
Yeah. And everybody does well in it.
Yeah.
It's
you really feel like I have encountered the essence of Poe, what he was probably really like.
To speak directly to the audience, if you're thinking like, I know that series, it's not good. I don't know anything else from it. I didn't really watch it. If you're thinking, well, it's made for TV, is it going to be Twilight Zone-ish, like, you know, kind of eerie but not high quality? This one is. It's a period piece. It looks like they put money into it. All of the actors do a really great job. For a horror thing, I think it's really good. And as a side note, there's a little extremely mini documentary on YouTube about Sylvester Stallone's obsession with Edgar Allan Poe. I know. I thought, this has got to be the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. I'm going to bite. So I watch it, and when Sylvester Stallone was first getting his start and he was going to direct Rocky, he wanted to write, direct, and star in playing Poe. There's photos of him dressed up in the garb and a top hat and everything, even though nobody told him, you don't look anything like him. To this day, the project fell through, but it kept coming back up. And there's even, like, I think little videos he's posted on Twitter or somewhere where he's, like, saying Poe is a huge inspiration for him and, like, keep punching up, Poe. You know, like, he survived, you know, he still thrives in our culture because people keep coming back to him, and he still really loves him and would love to do that. I hope he would do the project and just pick somebody else to do it. So I think he's a decent director. But yeah, that is an interesting story. Just to say, Poe, if you think like it's just the goth kids, no, it's the jocks. It's the pretty people. It's the weird people. It's everybody. He's so universal. And he wrote universally, you know, with like his poetry, wrote mystery stories, horror, and science fiction. A forerunner to Sherlock Holmes and also modern science fiction too. So he ran the gamut, and well worth mentioning. And this is the best adaptation that I know of. So I yield my time, and on to you.
My third pick, I went back and forth on what to even put on this list. I had 1 and 2 locked in. But for 3, I decided to go with Unsane. It's directed by Steven Soderbergh, and it's a psychological horror about a girl. She had a stalker at one point. She moves cities. Then she goes to the doctor to like get her medication refilled or something. And then she ends up being locked in a mental institution against her will. And while she's there, she thinks one of the employees is her stalker. And through the whole movie, we don't know if this guy is actually her stalker or if this is her delusions, because it makes you think both are true. But I think this movie, I'm not going to say greatest movie of all time, but I do think everyone should watch it, especially if you're an aspiring filmmaker, because this is low budget of low budget, but it shows that low budget doesn't have to mean low quality. So I think the entire movie was done for $15,000, and all but 1 or 2 scenes were shot on an iPhone 7. I think there's like one scene where they're in a car. They just couldn't get it stable, so they had to use a different camera. But even then, it wasn't like top of the line camera. But yeah, I think it just shows you as long as you've got the talent and the creativity, money and equipment doesn't matter as much, because you could watch this movie, and if you didn't know that they only spent $15,000 or that it was shot on an iPhone, not even the newest iPhones, like you wouldn't know the difference.
Or if you don't know the concept of money, candy bar's still $100, right?
Well, they are nowadays.
Rain Man mathematics.
You mentioning, I hate to go back to this, but you mentioning the cameras, the 2 different cameras, for some reason triggered me to remember that Jeffrey Combs also performed a one-man show of Edgar Allan Poe. And there are clips of it on YouTube. And it exists somewhere because it was filmed, but he has blocked it from getting released. I got to meet him one time at a horror convention.
Shout out to Scarefest.
And yes, Scarefest, Lexington, Kentucky. Go to it and support them if you want to keep it going. but complain about the prices. Anyway, so I was like, when am I going to get to see that? And he was like, probably never. They used like 3 different cameras. They don't match. And I was like, bro, just make it all black and white and make it a bit grainy, like sync it a little. What does that matter? He was just really not happy with the quality. But I'm like, you are all I care about. You are what I want to see in the performance and portrayal and the writing. So, guys, this is just us, right? Our small little 10-person 9-person community. If anybody knows how to get that or where to get it, I don't want to sell it. I just want to see it. Okay? Like, that's all. I just want to see it in a as legal a fashion as possible. But I think Jeffrey would be understanding about this. Anyway.
Yeah, and to get back to like Tyler's film, I have not seen that, but it does sound very interesting. And I think probably the selling point for me that you mentioned is that line between, is it her delusion or is it really happening? And I love films that play with that ambiguity. I think that's one of the strongest elements. It can be one of the strongest elements in a suspense or horror film, is to have the audience questioning what's really going on. That itself is a major element of suspense or horror.
Didn't you say
is questioning reality?
One of your potential picks would have been Frailty.
Yes. Frailty was one that I went back and forth on.
Have you seen Frailty?
I don't think so.
Because that one is, without giving too much away about it, these young boys are raised by their father to basically be demon killers. It's almost like Supernatural or something. And you're really questioning
Up to the last minute.
Are they doing this? Like, do they legitimately have this gift?
Or was
their dad just brainwashed them
because he was mentally ill
and convinced them of that this was their sworn duty, this was their purpose in life. And so that ambiguity of like what's really happening, are these people dangerous? Are they demons, or are these people just delusional and they're the problem?
My friend Jeremy Slavin told me about, he had just watched it, called me and said, oh my God, you got to watch Frailty. And I was like, Matthew McConaughey? I guess. And it's kind of got 2 twists at the end. This is an honorable mention for sure, but like, watch Frailty. We should watch, like, get together. If we watch anything, I say Frailty or your weird movie.
Yeah, because they both play with that idea of what is reality and making the audience question what they are perceiving.
Because you really don't know right up until the end. Did you spoil yours? Did you say what happens?
No. Because like with this movie, it's just like, just when you're ready to believe one way or the other, they'll drop something, make you be like,
It keeps going back and forth. And pulling
that's
the rug
very
out from under
clever.
you.
Very clever. And to also touch upon your point of it being done on a lower budget, this was something that you and I were actually talking about as far as like doing the podcast, doing creative projects, is sometimes it is just passion. It is, you're just driven by a passion. You don't know how something's going to turn out, but it's just for your love of something and the pursuit of something that you just want to create.
Yeah.
Regardless of what happens with it, if it's accepted by people or not, or what materials you have, you just use what you have and you experiment just out of the pure passion of it. And I don't think it gets any better than that.
Yeah, you said Soderbergh?
Yeah.
He is excellent at making something with nothing.
Yeah. I don't know if he's the one that wrote this. Someone else might have wrote it, but I think he funded the entire thing out of pocket. With no marketing, just went out, got the people, shot it.
What was the name of it?
Unsane. Yeah.
Oh.
And then just dropped it in at one of the film festivals.
What year was that? Or approximately?
I'm trying to remember. I want to say it was 2018.
Oh, okay. So pretty recent.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 2018. Moving onward.
All right.
Okay, so we're moving on to our second favorite horror films, and I'm giving mine away by the shirt that I'm wearing today is Ghostface. So my second favorite horror film is the original Scream from 1996. I've always been a Wes Craven fan. My birthday is August 2nd. Wes Craven's birthday was August 2nd. So being a little horror nerd, Wes Craven was always an icon for me. Of course, loved Nightmare on Elm Street growing up. And I knew a little bit about when Scream was going to come out, but the lead up to it didn't capture me. The trailers, this and that. I wasn't that excited about it. And I didn't even see it the week or so that it came out. It was a couple weeks later. My brother and his girlfriend at the time had gone to see it, and they were like, you would like this movie. You should go see it. So we planned to go see it together. And from the opening scene, everyone knows, I'm not spoiling anything. You go in and the first person who gets a call from Ghostface, the first person Ghostface is playing his little game with, is Drew Barrymore. And you think to yourself, okay, it's going to be a scare, but she's going to survive. And
she was one of the bigger stars who was in it.
Right, right.
That was the bait and switch.
Yeah.
And then she just dies this horrific death within the first 12 minutes of the film. And you're just so shocked by that. It hooked me in a way that a horror film hadn't in so long. And then as I'm sitting there watching it, and of course, it's this perfect blend of suspense and horror and fright, but with fun. And it has fun with what it's doing. And it pays homage to the things that came before it. And of course, it was very meta. And a lot of people say, well, Scream started the whole modern meta thing. No, it did not. That was also Wes Craven, though, in New Nightmare. New Nightmare was the character of Freddy Krueger being given so much power by our belief in him that he was bleeding over into the actor's real life and things. And so Wes Craven was on this meta train before anybody. But I was sitting there watching Scream and I was like, this movie is so fun. It was exciting. It was making me laugh. The characters felt very real. They weren't just cardboard filler. They felt thought out. They felt relatable.
Who was the bad guy? Who's the not
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. And throughout the movie, my brother and his girlfriend kept looking at me and being like, who's the killer? His Ghostface. And I'd say, it's the boyfriend. The boyfriend's the killer. And then I'd be like, no. That's too obvious. It's not the boyfriend. They want you to think it's the boyfriend. Except probably Randy, the horror expert. Yeah, it's him. It's got to be him. And then 2 seconds later, I'd be like, no. It's that cop. Like, yeah, it's probably Dewey. Right up until the end, I was like, yeah, it's Dewey. It's that cop. And then, of course, there was Sydney's dad. And I was like, oh, they might pull the real switcheroo. And so I just kept rethinking what I was thinking the entire time. I was guessing a different killer every 5 minutes. We're going to spoil the whole movie. Like, if you haven't seen it, sorry. It's been out since 1996. It's iconic. But yeah, there's a point where you think that Billy, who's played by Skeet Ulrich, you think that he's dead, and then he comes wounded down the staircase to save the day, you think. But then he turns, on Sydney, and he delivers that iconic homage to Anthony Perkins from Psycho of we all go a little mad sometimes. And that's supposed to be the big reveal, because I remember when Billy had died, I was like, well, the movie just lost some of its appeal for me. But then he comes back, and then the minute he was walking down the stairs, I was like looking at my brother and being like, oh, wait a minute, is it him? Is it him? Oh my God, is it? And then when the reveal, I'm like, yep, it's right in front of my face the whole time. And I thought that was it. And then, of course, you have the scene on the doorstep where she's got, Stu and Randy are accusing each other. And you're just like, is one of them in on it too? Like, I don't know. Like, which one do you trust? Like, oh my God, like Stu is Billy's best friend, but like Randy's clearly like the weird horror fan. So I don't know. And then you have that second reveal of Stu. And basically Billy's got this whole grandiose motive. And then, she's like, why are you doing it, Stu? Like, why are you killing your friends? And he's like, peer pressure, and it's clearly like he's Billy's little lapdog. It's just so memorable. Just the whole twist upon twist, the elements of suspense, the fun, and then the ending. I remember I've watched a lot of documentaries, read a lot of stuff about this, and Wes Craven fought with the MPAA. He fought with all the screening things and stuff because originally Scream was going to be NC-17. Yeah, they wanted the first cut where she gets stabbed, like basically in the heart. They wanted that cut. And they said, tone down that scene where Billy and Stu are stabbing each other. And Wes Craven was like, it's two psychopathic teenage serial killers wanting to look like they're the victims, stabbing each other. How am I supposed to like make that less gory or horrific or whatever? And there's so many little side stories to things that happened during that filming. Lightning in a bottle. The casting was lightning in a bottle. Drew Barrymore was originally cast as Sydney. When she joined the project, she was going to play Sydney. Then she went to Wes Craven and said, Wes, what if I play the opening kill? What if we pull that trick and have them think I'm the main character, but then I get killed off and we cast an unknown as Sydney? And she sold Wes Craven on that idea. That was part of why I think the film became so iconic. And then Skeet Ulrich was obviously like a perfect choice for Billy Loomis. He is charming, but he has this little element of like, you don't really trust him. He can go right from like charm one moment to terrifying the next. And so he was a great choice. Neve Campbell, good choice for, obviously she's been part of the franchise up until like the last film. Sidney Prescott is a lot of people's favorite, final girl. So taking the gamble on her was also a risk, but one that paid off. And then Matthew Lillard, of course, as Stu, way over the top, but that's what that character was supposed to be. And there was a famous scene where Billy throws the phone at him and he was supposed to just toss it to him, but there was so much blood on his hand that he lost grip and it ends up like hitting, Stu, right, or Matthew Lillard, like right in the face. And he says that line, "Oh God, you hit me with the phone, dick," and like, that was ad-libbed. And that was a real moment. And Wes was like, we're leaving it in there because that's comedy gold. The fact that Kevin Williamson was homeless pretty much at the time. He was house setting when he wrote the script and was trying to get something off the ground, trying to get his writing career going. He had been doing other jobs and was at a point of desperation. And he was watching a documentary about the Gainesville murders. And the idea just came to him. He was just like, the very first thing that came to his mind was like, what if somebody's in a house by themselves, they get a phone call, this person's like, hey, horror trivia, get it right, you live, get it wrong, you die. And he just started writing the script from that. And then he knew he wanted it to be based around these teenage kids, and he wanted this feeling of like everyone's a suspect. And he wrote the script, I think, in like 2 weeks' time. His agent started putting it out there. He said his agent called one day and said, I have some news for you about your movie you wrote. And he's like, well, what's going on with it? And she's like, there's a bidding war for it. And then once Wes Craven took on directing it, he was like, oh God, this might actually work. But it was, by critics, it was considered DOA at the box office. It was released at Christmas time, but word of mouth rocketed it up into the atmosphere. And it had a good first run, and then it got re-released, and the momentum just stayed strong. It revitalized that whole meta and teenage slasher genre. And 27 years later, it's still going strong. So that's why it has to be on my list. It's a movie that I think revitalized my interest in horror. And Ghostface is my favorite, slasher. I've been obsessed with Ghostface for 27 years now, but I digress. That's all I'm going to say about Scream right now.
There was more?
Oh yeah, there's 6 films, and I have a whole ranking of them and whole things that I think should be canon and should not be canon, and
I was
rankings
kidding.
of the ghost faces.
I knew. I know. Pan's Labyrinth. And you?
What?
My second pick was Pan's Labyrinth. Guillermo del Toro is he's not only sometimes more of a horror fan than a outright participant, but it's one of the rare like fantasy horror things. You don't necessarily, it's blended with the backdrop of this was it Civil War? It's been a while since I've seen this. I'm a little foggy on the details, but it's this the horrors of real war, and it's acted so well. And this little girl gets mixed up in this fantasy world, which again is another one that you don't really know what's real and what's not. Could it be that all of this is really happening, or is it just inside her mind?
A form of escapism from the real life horrors that she's facing in her young life.
And there are clues that it's real, and even in the end, I think it's you make the choice. I think the audience makes the choice. I don't think it's actually spelled out. Some would maybe argue that it is, and that ending is the one I choose to believe in because it's 1% happier. But I mean, when I think about that, when I'm like, was that horror? Because like that guy got his like face cut, like up the. Have you seen Pants up like his like the corner of his mouth up his cheek. And they show him like stitching himself up, and I'm like, oh, how did they even do that? But then I think about like the monsters. Is like even the friendly one, the fawn is scary enough, and then the
things
skin
with
man,
the
Pale man.
eyes.
what's it called?
Isn't it just the Pale Man?
The pale man, yeah. When he has his eyes in his hands,
Yes.
and
That does haunt my nightmares.
the little fairies are even off-putting.
Yeah, there's a sense of distortion. Like this is we think of like fantasy worlds and enchanted forests and stuff as like really beautiful and sparkling and magical, but this one has an element of being off.
Well, I think that that's
and
Guillermo
yeah.
taking it back to the roots and origins of
Grimm's, like Grimm fairy tales.
because this is what Americans sell to their kids, but everywhere else in the world, like the supernatural is a dangerous thing to mess with in any capacity. In America, it's like, oh, you can go to this land of rainbows and unicorns. No, in other countries, they tell it like it is that unicorn horn is coming straight for your chest. And it will kick you in the head. There's also that frog that has to throw up the thing and then turns inside out. That's less scary, but it's pretty disgusting.
Still disturbing. And the
and the
fawn.
mandrake.
The fawn is a perfect example of that ambiguity that we talked about. Like he's definitely a trickster, you know, and and he has like his moments that he's charming and appealing, but you also know like
He turns on a dime and he can become scary, but it's
yes.
all a test because he has to be harsh with her to make sure that she is going to do the things she says because she's young and irresponsible. And in the end, well, I won't say. I don't want to spoil too much of anything about this because if you haven't seen Pan's Labyrinth, yes, you're going to read some subtitles. It is in Spanish, but you're not going to see a whole lot of like, I guess there are a lot of foreign horror films and a lot of people have gotten away from watching movies. I probably literally no person I work with or deal with a lot on a daily basis goes out of their way to watch a foreign film with subtitles. This is the one to go watch. Or if you find a version that's dubbed. I've never watched that. I've always wanted to so that I can appreciate the visuals on a higher level because my eyes keep darting around.
right.
You could probably even watch it as a silent film. It works well enough for that with everything that's happening. Except the end when that guy smashes his watch. Oh my God, that is one of the best moments just in
Yeah,
cinema.
it is filled
love
with like
that.
captivating moments. That is something that I will say is like if you think about Pan's Labyrinth, there are just going to be these moments that you'll just remember because it is so well done. And I have to give a shout out to the actor who portrayed the fawn,
Doug Jones.
Doug Jones, and he's one that gets overlooked in the sci-fi and horror type of genre, but he's so important. He did play the fawn. He
And the
also
Pale Man.
yes, and some of the characters in Crimson Peak, which was also considered for my list. Beautiful, beautiful gothic, dark fairy tale kind of story within itself. And he played some of the creatures in that, and of course, he played the main creature in The Shape of Water, which is one of the most amazing films that I've ever watched. And he portrayed so much in that character, just able to transcend all the makeup and everything that he's ever put in and make you sympathize with whatever being that he is portraying. So he does not get enough credit. Big shout out to Doug Jones.
Agreed.
My number 2 pick, I'm surprised it's not come up yet, but John Carpenter's The Thing. I really wanted to talk about this for our practical effects episode, but I knew I was going to be talking about it here, so I let it go. But the practical effects in that movie are amazing. The guy in charge of them, Rob Bottin, was only 22 at the time.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. Impressive.
So, like, he had help, obviously, but he was the one running the show when it came to the effects and has gone on to do many more things. But, I don't know, just the common theme with the horror movies I like is that unknowing. Because all throughout that, it's like who is and who isn't the thing. And I think that's one of the reasons it overshadows the original Thing from Outer Space from the 50s is because the thing doesn't transform. You know who it is and where it is at most of the time. But with this, is like even at the end, we're back to square one of not knowing if it's still there. Did they kill it? Did they not kill it? Did it change one of them? And all could have been avoided if they spoke Russian. Because they were trying to tell them that it was the dog the whole time.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah, you make a very, very strong case for that film. It's one that I have come to appreciate more over time for a lot of those reasons that you talked about. But, I grew up in the era of the slashers. The slashers were some of the first stuff I was introduced to, with Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween. And I have a strong tendency to go for those. So I always preferred, of John Carpenter's work, I always preferred the original 1978 Halloween, which if we were making a different list of like the most quintessential horror films, that would definitely be on my list, because I think it is the perfect little cat and mouse, bare bones, basic, but very effective horror slasher film. But over time, I've gone back and revisited broader aspects of the genre. And I think The Thing is actually a more diverse and all-encompassing type of horror film, whereas Halloween's a great slasher, but on a higher level, The Thing is probably superior.
It was a surprise to me that it was actually a flop and cost John Carpenter what would have been a lucrative contract with Universal, because The Thing, I have gone brain dead, went up against E.T. and the one that Ridley Scott did that year, Blade
Alien?
Runner.
Blade Runner? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So Blade Runner and The Thing came out at the same time. Both of them flopped. E.T. made the big jump there, but I think both of those movies kind of...
The more easily digestible,
Yeah.
family-friendly, big blockbuster of those.
Whatever year it was that Rain Man came out, Rain Man was the biggest movie of that year. Let that sink in. That could never happen today. There would never be... That would be an indie film that would get buried on Tubi or something.
That's a whole other conversation to be had.
Where are we at now? Becky's number one pick.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Oh, are we? We've already arrived at that moment. Okay. My number one pick, my favorite horror movie, and my favorite movie, period, is Ari Aster's darkest fairy tale, Midsommar, which probably says a lot about me as a person.
Yeah, the doors aren't locked, are they? Were you the last one in?
What?
We might be in danger.
Yeah, there was a meme that went around that was like, if your girl, says, I'm going to put on my favorite movie and it's Midsommar, get the hell out. Find an escape route. So, yeah, but it is my favorite movie for a multitude of reasons. I think Ari Aster is a force to be reckoned with. I debated about whether to put Hereditary or Midsommar on this list. Again, if it was what are the quintessential horror films with the most influence, it would have been Hereditary instead of Midsommar, because my introduction to Ari Aster was, of course, Hereditary. And I remember watching Hereditary for the first time by myself at like 1 o'clock in the morning and being so traumatized that I stopped it several times during different points and different beats of the film and questioned whether or not I wanted to finish it. And I never do that. I never do that with horror movies. But it really had me questioning, like, can I even watch this movie? And I did end up finishing it, and I did not sleep at all that night. And it has stayed with me. I love it, but I will not go back and watch it by myself. It did something to me that no other film has ever done. And so when I heard, like, okay, yeah, he's doing a new movie, it's doing Midsommar, and I saw some trailers for it. I started hearing some buzz about it, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm really curious. And then a friend of mine who is also deeply steeped in the genre and usually has very similar opinions to mine, she saw it before I did. And she sent me a message on Facebook and was like, this movie has messed with me in a way that I can't even describe to you. That was a selling point. I was like, okay, if this person who is like so well versed in horror and usually can sit there and laugh at horror is telling me like this movie is stuck with me and it's kind of messed me up, then I'm definitely going to go see it. Again, it's one of those movies that within the opening scene, it is so dark and so heavy that you know what you're signing up for. I guess it's a little bit, it goes into spoiler territory, but it has to be talked about if we're going to discuss this movie at all. The opening scene begins with the main character, who is played by the most brilliant actress of this era, Florence Pugh. Her character is getting these weird texts from her mentally ill sister. And she's saying very disturbing things like, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I'm taking mom and dad with me. All these weird texts. And she calls her boyfriend for consolation, and he's of no help. You know, he's like, oh, your sister's dramatic. Only then we do find out the sister was not bluffing. And she gets delivered this news that, like, yeah, your whole family just is gone. And that's where we start out with this character. And then, of course, the horrible boyfriend decides, like, he was planning to break up with her. There was a whole discussion with him and his friends about, like, how he's going to go to Sweden and hook up with all these hot Swedish chicks and just forget about her. But then, of course, that happens, and he's like, oh, man, can't break up with her now. And that's how she ends up being included in their plans, because they're anthropology students. And him and some of his friends were writing theses on old paganistic small community cult type communities. So they were going to go and witness the Midsummer festival in this little enclave called the Harga. So they go there and they think they're just going to observe, learn about these people's weird beliefs, and have a good time. Very quickly, when they get there, they begin to be lured into the festival and into the whole cult atmosphere themselves. And the fact that this happens as her relationship with her boyfriend of several years is crumbling. She's clearly seeing that this person that she loves and was counting on for support during her darkest hours is not the person that she needs him to be. And all of these things come together and converge in such a way that she is ripe for being indoctrinated into embracing the bizarre ideas of the cult. And just the grief and the journey that this character goes on is so compelling. It was the first time, I think, that I ever remember when I was watching the movie, I felt so connected to this character. I felt such deep understanding and love for her that there's a point towards the end of the movie where you think that she might do something self-sacrificing, like maybe she has this moment of regret with some choices that she's made. I felt like that was the first time. You know, people always say, oh, you talk to the characters in the film. You're saying, don't go in that room. Don't trust that person, you know. And maybe you do a little bit, but I really felt sincerely like I wanted to jump into the screen and stop Danny and be like, don't kill yourself, Danny. And again, that's the power of Florence Pugh's performance. I forgot completely that this is just a character and this is just a movie. And I felt every possible emotion towards this character. And then when we walked out of the theater, I'm usually the person that wants to start discussing the film, good or bad, the minute I walk out of a theater. But in that one, when I walked out of Midsommar the first time, my hands were shaking. I was crying. I did not know what to say. I was like, I have to see it again. I don't think I can take in the full spectrum of what this movie is unless I see it again. And the second time that I went back to see it, and it wasn't as shocking to me, and I was able to really appreciate different elements of it, because it is very horrific in a lot of ways, but it also is beautiful. There's moments of like joy and dance and celebration and love and all of these things. And it's, for me, I pick it over Hereditary because Hereditary, you know what it is, and it never tries to trick you. It's dark, it stays dark, it only gets darker. Midsommar gives you the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down, and you get tricked into believing it's not as horrific as Hereditary or some of these other films.
Yeah, you introduced Sarah to those movies, and now every other day it's, do you think this? I'm like, no, I can't.
And if I have to also say, since we talked about Ari Aster, I think he is one of the most brilliant minds operating these days. But his third film, Beau is Afraid.
Nope. Nope. Nope.
Yeah, that one I was an Ari stan, and I was like, I am going to watch this movie even though everyone has told me not to. And I did go see it in the theater. 3 hours of my life that I will never get back. And I still have no idea what I watched. And I don't think I would ever understand it. And yeah, but again, in Ari's defense, this is the way he sold the movie, is it is a 3-hour, non-linear descent into absolute madness that you experience with the character.
Side note, that could also describe this podcast. Well, I'm not going to ask you what your top pick is because I don't think we picked I think you're going to pick something obscure, but you haven't necessarily. The one I didn't know, and yeah, everybody knows The Thing. So did you pick something of Stephen King for number one?
I did not.
Okay. As a segue, there's a Danny in my pick also, and I think that gives it away. Red Rum.
Red Rum. Red Rum.
Come play with us, Danny. I'm not doing the voice. I'm too tired. It's the original Shining, which I'm really conflicted about this movie because it's just the first thing that came to me. It's the first thing that went on the list when you were like, pick these horror movies. And I said, well, The Shining. It's not even that it's my favorite or I think that it's the best, but it's something that it compels me to keep returning to it. Around this time of year, I could put it on and it could just be playing in the background while doing other things or like Halloween related. If you're going to have people over and you just want to have something playing, it does have a lot of iconic scenes that everybody knows, even if you're not a horror movie fan.
That is true.
Maybe you don't know, if you're not a horror movie fan, maybe you don't know where it comes from. Like here's Johnny's scene with him sticking his face through the door that he's chopped a hole through, to all of Shelley Duvall's performance, which has been mocked endlessly because
that cigarette ash that is 20 miles long.
Yeah, and that's been memed.
Yes.
People might not know what movie that's from, but they'll know that image, and that's because Stanley Kubrick drove her mad through his incessant.
I think some of that has been overplayed because of Dr. Phil, because where everyone thinks like, oh, Stanley Kubrick did this is because of that Dr. Phil interview. Shelley Duvall has actually gone on to say afterwards that yes, it was very stressful just because of the way that the subject matter and the way that Kubrick works, but he was actually a lot nicer to her than they made it out to
Then
be.
it's been portrayed.
Yeah.
It's been said that he was really protective of the one actor whose name I don't know is the boy who played Danny. That he was really protective of him. And then as much as I love Jack Nicholson, I'm sure he's not like the easiest person to be around. I don't know.
Isn't there a story too from like when he was in Mars Attacks? And he was supposed to be drinking the scotch or something, and they brought him like ginger ale or something was actually in the glass, and he stopped the production, and they had to go out and get him like his preferred brand of scotch or whatever. So yeah.
No judgment, no shade on Jack Nicholson. The TV adaptation that's truer to Stephen King's vision of it, and he had more creative control on it. Not to say he
King and
doesn't have
Kubrick
any.
had that infamous feud.
Yeah, and I mean, Kubrick just changed some key elements to how the story was portrayed and put in some really, like the guy in the bear costume. What's even going on there? That scares me. Like now thinking about it, I'm like, what was he doing to that old man? I mean, like,
it is best not to ponder.
It's obvious, like what
this
he.
question.
I mean, like I know what he was doing to him. But there's just like, why that? Did I mention, have I talked about the TV adaptation on this podcast?
I don't think so.
Okay. No. It feels small, but I think it was actually, no, they used the real place in the, didn't they?
The Overlook?
Yeah, no, they built it because it's got that impossible layout.
I was going to say, Kubrick, I think, used the
Stanley.
The actual hotel.
Yeah, the Stanley Hotel, I think it was.
But the way he set his camera up was to give you the idea that could be possible.
Yeah, and they used like those extreme lights to make it seem like the snow was outside, and even then they could shoot any time of the day. Mm-hmm. The TV adaptation, I gets made fun of a lot. It feels smaller. because the rooms are smaller. It doesn't have like as large a grand scope as the other one does. The other one feels like a movie, and this one feels like it's made for TV. That's the reality of it. The other one was a movie, and this one was made for TV. One of Stephen King's, and he is on record saying this. You can find this anywhere. He's probably never shut up about it.
Yeah, he hasn't.
When you see Jack Nicholson at the beginning of the film, there is, spoiler alert, inside the movie, this guy's gonna go crazy because he's one step away right now. Just look at Jack Nicholson. So it's not far-fetched. When you look at that guy from Wings,
Steven Weber,
you think like, oh, this is a nice recovering alcoholic. He's really trying to put his life together and do the best he can for his family. And then he slowly goes crazy and is going to murder them all, which is what happens. And then, Danny has, what's the name of his ghost? Tony, yeah. Tony is, it's subtly stated, but you find out who Tony is. It's actually a future projection of himself talking to him through time, which is weird, but because in the end it jumps forward to his graduation. This book's been out like 50 years. I'm not holding anything back on this. So that was interesting because he's able to like forgive his dad in the end, and I think that's a nice touch from Stephen King to not end so bleak as the other one ends bleak.
Yes, and Stephen King in the novel of Dr. Sleep put in a moment, because Dr. Sleep does go back in the end. It culminates at the old hotel as well. And he did write in a moment in the book. I think it may have been in the film adaptation of Dr. Sleep as well, but it's a much more poignant and heavy moment in the book that he does see the ghost of his father. They have a moment. And Stephen King made it very clear where he was with that moment in the book, that Danny has had his own struggles growing up, his own struggles as an adult. He's made some really horrific choices. He's also had a bit of a redemption arc, which, more of a redemption arc than his father's was, but he sees that his father really did try and just was overcome by like greater powers than his own. And there is a moment of recognition and forgiveness. Yeah, I think that's worth noting. I
love Ewan McGregor, and I love the way they did that film, because we were in hot debate about it. Like, what are they doing with this? Because it bridged this gap between the original Shining, which Stephen King hated, Stanley Kubrick's version, but it's clearly the more iconic version as a visual adaptation, and the sequel novel, Dr. Sleep, which is a novel to his original book. They made a movie. A guy approached him and said, what if we changed just a few things here and there and made a sequel to both, an amalgam that honors Stephen King's or Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining and your book, the sequel to The Shining, Dr. Sleep, and it works. The only thing that I hate about that one, and this is a more recent one, so cover your ears for 3 seconds, but Ewan McGregor does not make it to the end, and he does in the book?
Yes, he does.
What's that about?
Yeah, and see, that's why I have to be Team Kubrick. As much as I love Stephen King, and Stephen King is my other main horror idol. Wes Craven and Stephen King are the two top, the king of the kings for me. But yeah, I love Stephen King. That could be a whole other conversation. But within that feud, I take Kubrick's side. And the fact that King put his endorsement on Dr. Sleep, which I think goes much further away from the source material and changes things that absolutely should not have been changed, and actually takes away from the depth and the power of Danny's redemption story. The book of Dr. Sleep is far superior to the film. So I think it's just his deep-rooted hate of Kubrick and trying to get one last jab in at Kubrick that he endorsed this other film, even though I think it is a much worse adaptation of his work. Kubrick's film is iconic for a reason, and I stand by it. The changes he made it work. And I'm not going to say it's better than the book, because obviously it wouldn't even exist without the book, but it's definitely a better adaptation of the book than the movie that Stephen King himself actually endorsed.
Yeah, there's a reason we're still talking about it.
Yeah, if you're a horror movie fan or a book fan and you want completionist about this, go watch all of them. I recommend all of them and make up your own mind. I have not read Dr. Sleep. I was only going based on the film. There were things that I didn't like that then that I was like, no, that kind of sucks that happened. And then Becky then told me that didn't happen in the book. She filled in some gaps for me. But watch The Shining, read the book, watch the Stephen King adaptation. That's the miniseries that were popular in the 90s. They did Storm of the Century is really good. They did The Shining, The Stand. All are basically 3.5-hour movies just split up into chunks. All of those are well worthwhile, especially Storm of the Century. And then Dr. Sleep, and read the book of that too, and make up your own mind. But yeah, I think The Shining is like the quintessential horror movie. It might even be to the point where it's cliched, but...
Final pick is the original Night of the Living Dead.
That's a good one.
That was on my list of considerations as well.
Yeah, I love Romero's work. In high school, to graduate, I had to do a senior project. And this is probably the highest grade I got, was actually writing about Romero and his contributions to cinema. But the original Night of the Living Dead, the remake was all right, but I think it kind of missed the point. And a lot of people don't even know there was a remake. But this movie, I don't know if it's the exact reason the MPAA now has their ratings, but it's definitely a leading contributor, because by this point the Hays Code was almost out. Night of the Living Dead released October 1st, 1968. A bunch of kids went and seen it, and it scared the shit out of them. So by November 1st of 1968, 1 month later, the MPAA had implemented their ratings guide that all movies must go by now. Yeah.
Wow.
Because this was like the low budget at the time, and frankly could have made Romero a lot of money, but he was just going around asking like, hey, can we show this film here? Can we show this film here? And screwed himself out of a deal. Like, he doesn't even own this movie technically anymore. Yeah. And so he made almost nothing while the distributors made everything. And so this movie is technically in the public domain because of this, because he was so focused on making the film and getting it out there that he,
by any means necessary.
Yeah, he kind of didn't know what he was doing on the business aspect of it. I can't definitively say this was the first horror movie that I watched, but this is definitely the first horror movie that stuck with me. All of my childhood games where it's like Us Against the Monsters, it was, all right, we're locking this place down, boarding the windows up, because of that movie. Mm-hmm. And just the scene when that little girl turned to the zombie and was coming with that trowel is just something that I always remember, like that scene specifically.
The final shot, well, I don't know if it's the final shot, but the final thing that happens, the person who becomes the hero, the main character, that's like your final moment in Midsommar. That's what I was like, oh, you worked so hard.
Yeah.
So
I think that's why the original works over the remake, because Tom Savini was more about the practical effects and the visuals and stuff of it, and to make it more action oriented. So it's like Barbara was more an action hero that survives the end of it. Mm-hmm. Whereas Romero's original idea kind of showed what I think a lot of people miss with modern zombie movies. The zombies are terrifying. They're essentially us. They were us. They still look like us, but they're not. But the humans are still the real bad guys. The zombies are only the framework. And everything else is I think misses that. All of Romero's movies show that. It's like, yes, the zombies kill people and they're eating people alive. The humans are always the scarier threat. And each decade he made a movie kind of dealt with a different topic. And this one kind of inadvertently dealt with racism and stuff, because they asked him, it's like, oh, man, you're like this icon, this hero for putting a black man in this position. He's like, well, he was just the best actor, so he got the part.
Yeah.
It's like everything else was, and he just kind of continued that out with Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. They all tackled different issues at the time, like consumerism and all these different metaphors. So I think just for the movie that sticks out with me and its own little place in movie history, I think this has to be my number one.
When I said the few zombie movies, it's really Shaun of the Dead and the original Night of the Living Dead. I don't think anyone's made a better zombie movie that does what a zombie movie should do and gets a story across and isn't dumb. There's been, it became like a craze in the 80s and then kind of came back in the early late 90s movies and there were some video games that are basically, there's not monsterish things, but it's basically zombies. It's always zombies. And then even now, there's still zombie movies. Didn't Zack Snyder just put one out like a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
It never really goes away, and I think it's just there's too many, and it's not as versatile a thing. And that's why if I go back to it, I go back to a certain few that just nail it, and that's one of the ones that does. And Shaun of the Dead, because Shaun of the Dead is a human story. It uses this as a backdrop to show this guy whose life is up, and he has an opportunity to rise to the occasion. He actually finds a thing where he could actually be pretty decent at it. He still gets overwhelmed in the end, but he makes it out just barely, unlike the protagonist in the original Night of the Living Dead.
And it's interesting because this conversation that we've had about Night of the Living Dead also made me think of The Mist. Those two, for me, have a weird tie-in to each other because Stephen King has said that The Mist is about what happens when people's brains absolutely melt down because of the horror that they're facing. And they get so overwhelmed by their fear that they become desperate and they make terrible decisions. And he stands by that. And I believe that he should. We see that a little bit at the end of Night of the Living Dead, that they're so paranoid about the zombies that they're not recognizing. It's just shoot first, ask questions later, basically. And that's a lot of The Mist as well, is they get so desperate that rationale goes out the window. And it had like that sort of shock ending as well, based on that idea of like, we're so ingrained in our fear that we make terrible choices that have terrible consequences. And that's part of the element of horror as well. So I just think that's interesting that both films sort of do that. But again, zombies are sort of at the bottom tier for me of my main interest of horror, but I am selective with them, and Night of the Living Dead is absolutely, the original is absolutely my zombie film.
Yeah.
And I think we'll wrap up here.
All right.
If you've made it with us this far, thank you. Let us know in the comments what's your favorite scary movie. As always, remember to
Favorite scary movie.
like and subscribe. Share this with your friends. And
Hi, Tyler's parents.
that's what I was going to say.
Shout out to any new listeners.
If Becky's here, who's actually listening. And until next time, remember, Plot 2 brought up...